What's up, everyone? DJ Sackman here. Thank you for checking out our YouTube. We really hope you enjoy our videos. In a brief moment, we'll get back to this video. But I just wanted to remind you that we have our Coaches Academy. So if you hit the link under this video, you can get immediate access to all of our courses, all of our playbooks, and our community. We have some of the top coaches in the world inside of this community and taking our courses. So if that is you, if you're a coach looking to expand your knowledge, looking to expand your network, hit the link under this video, and we feel like your Coaches Academy can really help you out. Let's get it.
Yeah. What's up, everybody? Coach JB here with HoopStudy. Really appreciate you guys joining us this morning. As always, and I kind of want to reiterate this. When you have questions today, please plug them in the chat. Uh, Traci is great at responding to questions. She thrives off of them. Just a quick introduction to who she is. Traci is a former college athlete. She qualified for the Olympics. I believe it was in '92, the Olympic trials.
Yep.
Yeah, the '92 Olympic trials. She went to Utah. She does social work, wellness coaching, personal training. She's pretty much a star, definitely a person that we're all privileged to have here today. So,
JB, when you first contacted me, the first thing that came to mind was talking about the combination of stress and confidence, because I think that they're very intertwined. Obviously, I think we hyper focus on confidence. It's something that develops. It's not something that you step onto the court with. You've got to obviously do the work first. But if you're stressed and not able to focus while you're training, the confidence isn't going to develop. So when I first get an athlete that comes to me and is seeking confidence, I'm going to focus most on their stress levels and gauge that. So that kind of brings us to understanding the difference between stress versus distress. Stress versus distress, the biggest thing that I want to get across here when I'm working with an athlete is the feeling of discomfort is fine. It's how much you can handle what you're going through and how you react to it that's going to really make an impact on the results that you have. So again, it depends on the athlete how much they can handle, but if they put themselves in tough situations more often that are slightly controlled, then we can build what they call stress tolerance. So when I talk about stress, I want the athletes to manage the stress that they can control and then build that tolerance, and then they can face the harder situations. So that's the difference between stress that you can manage and distress, which is the negative stress that we all relate to just regular stress.
so
Okay,
when
so
it
we can
comes to
actually,
my
oh,
bad,
go
go ahead,
ahead.
Trace.
I was just going to say, this stress versus distress will come out throughout the rest of the slides too. So this is information that you can get, obviously off the internet. It kind of exploded during COVID because certain people were able to manage certain stressful situations versus not. And I would say the easiest resource is probably Huberman Lab. He tends to really summarize this stress versus distress really, really well, and obviously his protocols to manage it. But that is why the individual work is so important, because everybody manages it and handles it differently, different levels of it.
Yeah, so the question that I had written down here, so, and you might hit on this a little bit later, when it comes to, let's say, training stress, right?
Yep.
Would you maybe start that with like a low stress level where, and I'm just trying to think of the comparison here, maybe with basketball that starts off with using a hand that you don't usually use, and then maybe to progress from there, maybe it's adding like a command. If you hear me say one, then you need to finish this way. You hear me say two, then you need to finish that way. Or is that like an appropriate stress level build?
Yeah, so there's varying obviously internal and external focus points, and that so we're talking like basic here to deal with
Hmm.
stress in these first couple of slides, right? So you obviously want to organize the things you want to focus on. So you're talking about very specific sport mechanics, right? If an
Mhm.
athlete is coming to me with questions about, okay, my mechanics are off and I continuously like make the mistakes in the game. Obviously, we don't want to do like fix the mechanics in the game as well as practice. You don't want to compound. That's the stress level that just goes in overload and the brain shuts down. Um, so what you want to do is what's a comfortable situation for this athlete, right? So maybe it's like a one-on-one, you're working on just the mechanics with your coach or even by yourself or with another player. And then you add like, you know, one other cue with that. So it's allowing the brain to relax and do what is very comfortable for you to do, and then adding, additional cues, or it might be, to perfect that a little bit more. And then the brain, each time you're doing it, relaxes and engages with the physicalities of it more. Okay. One of the things that athletes tend to get stuck on is when coaches tell them that you're overthinking. And so the past and the future is obviously in sports. That's something that we don't have control over. So this thought of overthinking comes from disorganization. And that's why I always start with like this slide, collecting your thoughts. So you've got to organize your priorities, manage your time, and I call this calendarizing. So it's literally taking your calendar, and that is your only source of where you're going to collect all this information that you're trying to work on in sport as well. Because if you're trying to pursue sports at a high level, you need to make it kind of all one unit first. So this is putting on like your sleep, how many hours you'd like to get, including nutrition, including your visualization, mental practice. So the collect part is really all working on your calendar. That's number one. That's the first thing that we work on when we're talking about confidence. This is one that is overlooked with a lot of high level athletes because they get engaged in their sport. I work with athletes that are homeschooled and train up to 30 hours a week. So they tend to lose their identity within the sport. So one of the things that I emphasize is who are you outside of sport, and really to build kind of, other ideas, hobbies, things that you're into. And then if something goes wrong in sport, it's not as overwhelming for them. So it actually builds resiliency to have other, hobbies, interests, and then as you move down into the detect is what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Really identify those, whether it be in sport or even in life, and then build on obviously your strengths and then work on your weaknesses, because that's going to build your confidence overall.
For that, you would say that the main question that you want the athletes asking themselves is, what is your identity outside of the sport?
Yes, yes. And
So,
also I
my bad,
encourage
go ahead.
setting, I also encourage setting goals outside of sport.
Okay. And then with that being said, so you ask, what is your identity outside of sport? You set those goals outside of sport. How do you pull that out of them if they don't have an answer? Like you ask me, like, oh, I introduce myself. Hey, I'm Justin Brandt. I'm a basketball coach and a basketball trainer. And you respond, well, you coach basketball and you train basketball players, but who are you? Is that kind of the way that you go about that?
So athletes want to talk about sport, right? That's what they're identifying with when they approach you. That's what you talk about. You start with their sport and basically the core issue because the work that I do, sometimes people tend to think like, oh, it's therapy. And the first thing people want to do is problem solve. That's why you get to that point where you reach out for help. So I kind of work in the reverse. That's part of the reason why I got out of clinical psych, was because I want to problem solve. I don't want to go to your past history first. I want to, help you function in sport the best you can right now. And then through that, I get to know them. And then we develop, conversation about like, hey, what else is going on? How's school? Or, if it's an older client, what about work? Other interests.
Mm-hmm.
Or like highlight, how do you figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are?
Mm-hmm.
So when they're young, you don't put obviously emphasis on like trying to detect what their strengths and weaknesses are. It's more through observation. And then they might, as an athlete, figure out. So there's a whole developmental stage. They might see my peer is better at this than I am. And they might say to the coach or their parent, I want to get better at that. And then you really want to emphasize, all right, well, if you're motivated to do that, let's work on that. You really want to go with where their interests are, their motivations first. And then they'll, develop that awareness of like, okay, I'm not as good, so I want to improve on that.
Yeah, so Aki just said it's a really interesting topic, and they're excited for the future because it's something that's coaches that we need to learn. And then tell me there was one more right after that in Japanese that I can't see.
Thank you. で、もう一つ、one more question before we go for the next.
Mhm.
How do you make the like a balance for the like when you approaching their strengths and weakness? Do you have any like like a standard to make the balance when you approach?
Of working on like emphasizing their strengths versus working on their weaknesses. So this comes back to their stress tolerance, right? So there's athletes that can put up with more critical feedback, and you can really work on their weaknesses. There's other athletes that need, for example, like accomplishment motivation. So it's like small, and this kind of brings us, this is a great question because it brings us to the next slide. Setting goals is really important for motivation and for working on your strengths and weaknesses. Because if you have a long-term goal, you're gonna really have a driver, right? You're gonna have that motivation to work on your weaknesses. But if you have an athlete that has a little bit lower confidence, you're gonna really have to emphasize using their strengths. Good. All right. So setting goals, I know that it's extremely cliche this day and age, like set goals and you'll be good to go. But the way that you set your goals are super, super important. Obviously, you want one of the conversations that I have with my athletes is to really engage in that like big dream goal, but then emphasize that you focus on the smaller steps. And the goals that you set, the smaller steps, have to be within specific time frames. With that said, it's not the end of the world if you don't reach those specific time frames, but it's more so just the commitment to them. And it puts kind of a boundary on, okay, I've got to get this work done by this time. And we break it down to if the coach isn't giving an athlete specific assignments, then we discuss the assignments. What do you want to accomplish by the end of the week in practice? How many, let's say free throws do you want to make, and training time on your own. So it's super important, if the coach isn't setting very defined assignments, that we get them down in the athlete's calendar, not only as something to do, but as goals.
So Traci, how and when do you encourage athletes to communicate with their coaches over this?
Say the last part again. Communicate.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're talking about goals, right, and setting those specific goals, how do you and when do you encourage athletes to communicate with their coaches with this topic?
So it's a fine line, right? Like, I do encourage the athlete to set their own goals and hold some of it kind of close to chest. So they really feel like there's ownership there, right? But then I'll give you an example. In my own career, I had teammates that all of a sudden were training more hours than I was, and I wasn't sure why. So I went to the coach and I said, I have goals. I have these things that I want to work on, but I'm not getting the training hours that these other girls were getting. So I was 14 at the time. And that conversation alone, just that I took the step to discuss my own goals with my coach, and it was something that he wasn't aware of, really set precedence for how much commitment I had to my sport. So through discussion, I think, if the athlete really wants to own those goals, that discussion with the coach can even boost their confidence and make them feel like, I'm at a stage where I'm going to discuss my goals with my coach, and they're going to know the path that I want to take.
So then would you say that setting and communicating your goals can set the tone and the standard for your journey as an athlete?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's like I was saying, there's kind of that fine line with when's the right time, to talk to your coach about your goals. And they've done research on this. So it's like, you don't want to over express your goals. But if you talk to the people that you trust and the ones that are going to help you get there, that's the most important conversation to have. But then when it comes to kind of staying focused, staying to yourself, obviously you don't want to just kind of boast about the things that you're working on, teammates, friends. Sometimes the over conversation is what causes the problem too. So it's like people who you trust and the people who are going to help you and support you to get there.
So just to sum that up and bring it all back here. So we can set it and communicate our goals to set that that tone or standard for your journey, and then communicate it with the people that you trust and the people who are going to help you attain those goals.
Absolutely. This is probably the most important slide of understanding mental skills from kind of a slightly different standpoint than what you typically hear. Mental skills need to be practiced, and this goes back to the stress level and like how you're going to load these skills with an athlete. They need to be practiced away from sport. So oftentimes I'll have coaches tell athletes to breathe, calm down, or visualize when they're under stress at a game or in practice. This is not the time to do it. And so I'll get into why. In psychology, there is, I think, one of the most understudied things called association. And when you're in high stress, if you're told to breathe, calm down, or relax, you're going to associate that practice with high stress. So I recommend to my athletes, I want you to become familiar and aware of breathing and relaxation and visualization after a good practice. after time with your friends, after time with your family when you're calm and in a good mood, or even you can kind of implement that mood yourself if you want to listen to music, something that puts you in a good mood. Then you want to practice breathing, relaxation, visualization. We want to develop the association with a really, really good feeling when you're practicing your mental skills. So that's the first step.
I might have an impossible question for you to answer here. So we're going to practice those things in, a good vibe environment. So this way you're associating those skills with that. Um, what's kind of that ratio? Like, how often are you practicing those things before you're going to start to try to apply them? Like, I'm going to do breath work in a good, relaxing environment before I go hop in a cold plunge and try it for the first time.
Yeah. So you want to become familiar with it to the point where when you're in a stressful situation, because commonly what happens, so this is, I'll give you the breakdown. We start with just simple breathing exercises. I'll give them an option of 4. And I'll say, take the next 3 or 4 days, maybe even the next week, practice those 4. It takes all of maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Breath work is the easiest place to start, and you just familiarize yourself with those. Then when you get in a stressful situation, or there's like something your coach says, one of those 4 is going to automatically kind of come to you. Like, I got to take a deep breath, or count to 4, calm my body down. So I leave it up to kind of situation as boss for it to really be infused in a little bit more stressful of a situation. It's more the practice and then letting it kind of develop. Self-talk is all about awareness. And I recommend, if an athlete is unaware of their negative thoughts, then we go directly to kind of a T chart, and just situations that are stressful for you or tough situations, and what are the positive things that you could say, and what are the things that you might be saying that are not helping you. And so once they see that in print, it's a little bit more obvious when you get under pressure, or you're trying to accomplish something, what the better thing is to say versus what you might be saying. And check-ins is a very kind of, it's overlooked. I recommend that athletes check in with their systems 4 times a day. You need to really develop self-awareness. And I give them time frames. So 8 a.m. in the morning, 12 p.m. in the afternoon, 4 p.m. in the afternoon, 8 p.m. Just check in with your system. Are you holding any tension? Are you in a negative mood that you could kind of flip? It adds up 28 times by the end of the week. You've checked in with your system to see if there's stress, tension, or negative thoughts that have been building up. So once they start to do that, they realize, more of their negative self-talk or just stress that they've been carrying around. So the check-ins are huge. You want to, so there's athletes that deal with like the racing thoughts, right? And they can explain that to you in several different ways. I'm overwhelmed. I'm thinking too many things at once. Oftentimes the coaches tend to just say you're all up in your head. So check-ins during that time would include, what's the most important next step? What do I need to focus on right now? So it's the general presence.
Yeah, it sounds like a really powerful tool to use during a stressful situation. I know, like for me, for example, if I feel like I have a lot going on and I got a ton of things to do, like I'll make a list on my dog foods. Like I might not be able to stop everything that's going on right now, and this could be a physical list or just a mental list. But these are my controllables, and these are the things that I can knock out, and that kind of just brings me back to, even zero center, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that presence is most important, which actually brings us to the next word of the cues. Back on that. Yeah. So cues boil down to what action are you going to tell your body to do? Oftentimes, athletes overlook the importance of mechanics in their mental skills. So they're talking about, I want to be more confident, but confident, it's not an action, right? You can't really show me confidence. So coaches will speak in terms of, just get out there and be more confident. I recommend that you actually give them a specific action that you want them to take and continuously repeat that until they're developing the movement in their body. And once they become secure with that movement, then their confidence is there.
Yeah, it's a really big point that DJ and I talk about a lot. And just to give a quick example, I'm not sure how it is in Japan, the things that are said, but in America, one thing that coaches say a lot, and I've heard it at every level in almost every gym, oh, they're soft. And I always ask the coach, what do you mean? And because saying something like that is an attack on a character, right? But if you can define it, now the athlete can do something about it. So as coaches, I would highly encourage you to define the words that you're speaking. So this way the kids can take action. So you might say that a kid is soft. If I ask you to define that, you might say to me, they don't rebound. They don't hit somebody when they go to rebound. They don't dive on the floor for loose balls. Okay, cool. Now we have our definition. So when you go to speak to your athlete, instead of saying, Tomo, stop being so soft, you can say, Tomo, get on the floor for the loose ball. That's going to help us. Now, Tomo, the next time there's a ball on the floor, Tomo can take action. But if his coach says to him, Tomo, stop being so soft, Tomo is now in his head trying to figure out what is it that coach is trying to get me to do, as opposed to having an actionable step. And Traci, I didn't mean to hijack the presentation right there. I just felt like that was
No, absolutely, you were spot on with that. And another thing that, I highly recommend that coaches avoid is, especially in games, asking, what are we doing? Palms up in the air, what are we doing? It's not getting you anywhere. You really just need to direct the action that you want the athlete to take, be very defined with physicalities, mechanics, what they can actually produce, for lack of better terms.
Well, I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I feel like it has to be asked as well. Would you say, going through this, presentation that we're going through right now, that it is critical for everything that we're talking about right now, for the coaches to do this with themselves before they even think about talking to their athletes about it?
Yeah, definitely. The coaches need knowledge, a general knowledge, right? They don't need to get into the finite details of psychology, but they need a general knowledge of how to coach peak performance and avoid all the other emotions. So one of the things that I tell my athletes that coaches need to do just as much, if not more, is you're at a crossroads majority of the time when you're trying to, have a breakthrough, right? Develop something new or to get better at something. And when you're at that crossroads, there's always emotions that are involved. Your brain can pay attention to those emotions, but you don't want to. You want to pay more attention to the mechanics and the steps that you need to take. So if coaches are coaching emotionally, their athletes are going to be emotional and they're not going to be developing the mechanics that they need to be.
So you would tell them to model the behavior and habits that they're expecting.
Absolutely. Yes.
Awesome.
And to write them down. They need to know them. Write them down what they want. Coaches need goals too.
Yeah, for sure. My bad. Go ahead, Summer. Yeah, it's really important for you as the coach to make sure that you have things written down and the standards are in place. An athlete just came up to me yesterday, actually, and said, I didn't get to play in last night's game. I asked him why. He said, because I missed practice. I said, did you know if you missed practice, you couldn't play in the game? And he said, yeah. I said, well, that's not his fault. It's your fault. He said, yeah, but he let other athletes play that missed practice. And I think that's where coaches mess up. Even if you lose the game, it does not matter because your actions matter. If you tell your athlete, if you miss practice, then this happens, but then you don't hold and you don't live up to that standard just because you're nervous about how that may impact the game, anything that you say from there out is almost null and void because the athletes are going to know that.
They're going to see through it. Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I work on with athletes too, is understanding your coach is human. So they're going to make mistakes. It enables them to develop obviously empathy. And I think that also enables them to refocus on themselves more so than blaming the coach for specific things. Look, they're human. They're going to, say and do things that aren't perfect all the time. Most important thing is to remain in control of yourself, your actions, and your behaviors.
Visualization.
Let's finish this slide and then we'll knock out the questions that are on the chat.
Sounds good.
Okay. So visualization, there's obviously set protocols that you can kind of pull up basic visualization, how to do it. But one of the things that I've found in the last probably 5 years to be the most helpful is to sit with the athlete and actually write out, like they dictate to me what the action in order of whatever mechanics that they're trying to work on, and I write it down. And then I will email or text that information to them and tell them to read it morning and night. And so they're reading through the steps of the mechanics, and then that gets set to one cue that you pick. All of those steps get set to one cue that you would use in practice.
So
Right. And
Tracy,
that, yeah, go ahead.
if we just wanted to do an experiment with that real quick. So I want to dictate to you making a one-handed pass to somebody. And so for
Yeah.
me, I would say that you would point 5 fingers to wherever your target is. Right.
Mhm.
So if I wanted to throw you a pass, I would just point my 5 fingers at you, and that's where the ball's going to go. So that's what I dictate to you. Excuse me. What would you say the cue would be from that?
Well, first I would ask you what happens prior to that, because you
Okay.
need the setup.
Okay. Cool.
You need to
So
know how you're going to,
go ahead.
you need to know how you're going to get into that position to do that.
Okay.
So we get that detailed. And then what's the finish, the follow through?
Mhm.
Then you would go to set your cue as the most important action. So the steps are very, very detailed. It's
Mhm.
almost like you're writing the entire script.
Okay.
And then the cue would be like the trailer.
Okay. So and I'm just trying to, make this as simple as possible for
Yeah.
everybody to understand. So we're going to dictate that and we're going to write the script, right? So maybe that's me gripping, the ball, pulling back, tucking my elbow, right, bringing it back here behind my head, and then I'm going to extend
Yes.
forward and throw it, right? Put 5 fingers towards my target. So that's the script that we write, right? So then maybe the cue simpler than that.
Yeah, much simpler. Like it's like a 2-word phrase or even
Mhm.
one word that
Okay.
it's basically just the trigger. Coaching and athletes, I recommend that if they have a topic or a question or something that they need to discuss, that they write it down, go over it, script it out so they feel more comfortable talking Oftentimes athletes hesitate to talk to their coaches, and even coaches hesitate to say specific things to their athletes. So they've got to have kind of these scripts written out. Communication takes practice. We don't always, it's not something that's natural for everybody. But the more you can become comfortable with it, the better athlete you're going to be. And of course, you're going to be a better coach.
Traci, we really appreciate you speaking with us today. Everybody who is here attending today, I will get notes over to you all. We'll get them translated for you, and the replay will be available as well.